And I think yesterday we had to talk Matt into making some remarks. Congratulations, Matt. Well deserved. This morning, the last session, we heard about Dr. Susan. And Joe mentioned her hospital up in Walt Hill. And I saw it a number of years ago. At that time it was closed and boarded up. It has many aspects to it I think that are important. The first hospital built without federal funds on an Indian for Native American people by the first Native American doctor. It was designated a National Historic Landmark in 1992, which of course is nice, but doesn't bring any money with it. But nevertheless important. In 2018, the National Trust for Historic Preservation named it as one of America's 11 most historic places, most endangered historic places. Most endangered historic places. Every year the National Trust comes out with that list of endangered historic places, and it's sort of depressing when you read the list and you feel that, well, maybe in a year there could be 15 of those or 10 of those will be gone. And I think it's a tribute to Nebraska, the spirit of Sandoz, but certainly in the spirit of Nebraska, that this building was there, was built there, is there, and will be there. Our speaker this afternoon is Dan Worth, FAIA, FAPT, Principal Emeritus, BVH Architecture. Dan is a Nebraskan. He was born in Oakland, Nebraska. I used to make a joke when I was working here before I retired that half the people I knew were born in Oakland, Nebraska. I don't know really what that said about Oakland, but I think quite a bit. Long nights or something. Dan is a graduate of the School of Architecture here at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln and also the Architectural Association in London, England. His degrees are in architecture and urban planning. He went to work for the city of Omaha, working on their historic preservation comprehensive plan, and got that up and going, and came in 1984. He moved over to join the studio at BVH Architecture in Omaha. Later relocating here to the Lincoln office, which is where I got to know him. Today Dan is retired, but I suspect is as active as ever. What's the greatest building in our state? The Capitol, right? Well, if you like the Capitol today and you see all that has been done with it, a lot of credit for that goes to a number of people in the state. One of them is Dan Worth, who had a great deal to do with the restoration of the Capitol. Remember when the scaffolding was all up around it a number of years ago? And I think was involved in certainly the planning for the modernization of the air conditioning system so that the senators could complain about something other than the air conditioning system, which they like to do a lot. And he's contributed not only to the restoration of that building, but to so many projects across the state, and I must include Omaha in that, in which the Douglas County building, Dan, you were involved in that, in the restoration of that wonderful structure. So buildings are important to us across the state, whether they be small or large, from the little courthouse in Arthur County to the Capitol. And people like Dan Worth have given their life and their talent to preserving those. So we're pleased that you're here today to share with us your involvement in the story of the restoration or revitalization, I'm not sure what word I should use, of the Susan Picotte Hospital, which I consider to be really one of the great national historic landmarks. Dan Worth?
Thank you, Mike. Hello, everyone. It's fantastic to be in person at conferences once again, isn't it? Yeah. This is my second conference this summer, so it takes a little bit of getting used to kind of mingling around with people, but it's really nice to be here and hopefully put maybe a little exclamation point on maybe what Joe Street has shared with you this morning on the importance and the life of Dr. Susan. And just a footnote to Mike's introduction, I did work on the Sandoz Center at Chatham State College. So one end of the state to the other. So my presentation really has five sections that we'll go through, kind of exploring a little bit about the background. Joe gave you a good overview of that this morning, but we're going to dwell more on the hospital itself and what's occurring right now and what's going to happen in the near future. Of course, Joe probably shared with you some of these statistics and the difficulty that Susan had early in her life and how she broke through and really became just an incredible figure to us in the state and to her people. The interest in Dr. Susan has just gone through an incredible curve, both with Joe's recent book and also with some other programs, Christine LaFlesche, of course, from NET, and there's another short video I think that's going to be debuted this coming Sunday at the Ross Film Theater by
Ingrid.
Yes, Ingrid Holmquist. Yes, right. Another Oakland connection in there somewhere, I'm sure. Right? But with these people, sharing their knowledge about Dr. Susan, when we stepped into the project, half of our battle was really taken care of because the awareness curve about Dr. Susan was really starting to take off. And of course, Joe shared with you that Dr. Susan attended the Women's Medical College in Philadelphia. Now it's part of Drexel University. Graduated as valedictorian in her class, and there she is, right there. And just loved everything about the school, and was very excited to get back to Walt Hill, to her people, and establish her practice, which she did. This is her home that was built in 1905, 1907. And early in her career, this is where she held her clinic. It was also a social center for the community, and it was just a hub of activity. That this building still is extant in Walt Hill, and it's another very, very valuable resource in the community of Walt Hill. But her dream was this building, the Dr. Susan LaFlesche Picotte Hospital, which was constructed in 1912, 1913. She practiced there until her untimely death in 1950. She only spent 3 years in the building. But her practice and the hospital continued through the end of World War II and late into the late 1940s. And then the hospital closed, unfortunately. It went through a number of different uses after that, a bakery, a nursing home, some reports as an upholstery shop for repairing automobiles and furniture, and then fell into disrepair. Before I go on to talk more about our project as an architect, and when we start on a restoration project, I'm always very interested in who came up with the creative ideas, and I wanted to share a little bit of information to you today about the architect of the Dr. Susan LaFlesche Picotte Hospital. His name was William Steele, and Mr. Steele was born in Springfield, Illinois. He went to the University of Illinois in Champaign, Urbana, right about the time that Dr. Susan was in medical school in Philadelphia. He graduated and he went to work for this gentleman in the upper left-hand corner, Louis Sullivan. And if you know anything about architecture, Louis Sullivan was the father of the Chicago School of Architecture. In his studio, he had Frank Lloyd Wright, and a number of just incredible talented architects. And William Steele was one of them. The building on the lower right-hand corner is the Guarantee Building in Buffalo, New York. It's just an example of kind of the American Art Nouveau, the organic architecture that Louis Sullivan was aspiring to. Mr. Steele practiced there until around 1904 when he moved to Sioux City. He joined a practice there, soon became a principal because of his talents, and he practiced in Sioux City until around 1928. One of his probably signature projects was the Woodbury County Courthouse in Sioux City. I don't know if anybody in the audience has been to Sioux City to see this, but it's an extraordinary building. You can see the influences, perhaps, of Frank Lloyd Wright and Prairie School, and the ornamentation, the influences from Louis Sullivan is quite extraordinary. I found a few plates from the dedication booklet from the courthouse as well. Some of the interior ornamentation and detailing is just fantastic. In 1928, Steele was so popular that he moved his practice and he joined forces with Thomas Rogers Kimball here in Omaha. Of course, Tommy Kimball is probably the father of Nebraska architecture. He ran the national competition for the design of our state capitol, designed St. Cecilia's Cathedral, and of course, on the right-hand side, the Fontenelle Hotel in Omaha, which is no longer with us. After Kimball died, Steele took over the practice, and he practiced late until the 50s when he passed away. This was one of his last projects on the East Campus here in Lincoln County Hall. How Dr. Susan and Mr. Steele met, I don't know. I've done some research on that. I can't find any, and maybe Joe knows how they met, how she gave him the commission to design the hospital. I have a suspicion that Mr. Steele was very involved with the Archdiocese in and around Sioux City, and also with the Presbyterian churches, and did a number of religious commissions, and that's perhaps how they became friends and acquaintances. But Mr. Steele designed this, and it's certainly based upon many of the trends in tuberculosis hospitals of that time period. Here you can see the beautiful east porch with big arched openings for light and air. That was a big emphasis for rehabilitation from illness in those days. And the very simple kind of bungalow craftsman style architecture that was used in the design of the hospital. As Mike said, it was placed on the National Register of Historic Places in 1988, and that was elevated to the highest honor in our nation as a National Historic Landmark in 1993, mainly because of Dr. Susan's incredible accomplishments and her impact on our country. We only have 21 National Historic Landmarks in the state of Nebraska, and they vary from boats to archaeological sites to pieces of architecture. But so you can understand how special this place really is. In the late 1980s, after the building had fallen into quite a bit of disrepair, this gentleman, Keith Mahaney, and Walt Hill, and a few of Dr. Susan's descendants and other concerned citizens bought the hospital, incorporated, and created the Susan LaFlesche Picotte Center, Inc., we call it the Picotte Center, and rescued the building. And they did some work in the early 1990s. They did some paint up, some fix up. I believe they put on a new roof in the early 90s, put in a new mechanical system, and did some interpretive planning. You can see some articles on the walls in the corridor, and found some furniture that they placed back in the building. But being in a small town, a very poor community, and a very elderly kind of board, over time, the hospital started to fall back into more disrepair. This is a picture of Charlene Lehman. She's a descendant of Dr. Susan's, leading a tour of us in really 2018, I believe. About that time, there was several people, kind of, Joe was in this group of people that were starting to say that, boy, there needs to be something done with Dr. Susan's hospital, because there were some really bad things starting to occur. As you can see, Charlene's pointing at one of the big problems in this photograph. When we showed up in 2018, this is what it looked like. Of course, it had been coated in asbestos cement siding. Around the northeast corner, there was starting to be some severe structural settlement. Lack of maintenance everywhere. The biggest threat to the hospital at that time was the condition of the roof. Basically, anytime the wind blew, shingles would blow off of it. Trees had started to fall on the roof, puncturing big holes in the eaves and into the roof system itself, causing these gigantic leaks into the hospital. And you know very well that once water gets into a building, it just starts to go south really, really fast. And the hospital, when we walked into it, you open the doors, this big waft of black mold smell would just kind of ooze out of the building. The roof was so bad there were 3 or 4 major leaks, causing severe damage all around the hospital. And it was getting into the lower level and starting plaster to fall, and water was getting into the foundation. So it was right at the tipping point where we were going to lose the building. One of the first things we did, along with Judy Goshkabosh, who's the executive director of Nebraska Commission on Indian Affairs, we put together a small little group, and we wanted to raise the awareness as much as we could on the condition of the Dr. Susan's hospital. And we submitted an application for 11 most endangered status by the National Trust for Historic Preservation. And bang, we got immediate response, and it was accepted. And that was a great, well, the condition of the hospital, of course, was very disconcerting, but the publicity, the national publicity that we got because of the elevation to this list was tremendous. We were able to enlist the aid of the First Lady, Susan Shore, to join the effort. We held a press conference in the rotunda of the state capitol, where we announced the status of this landmark. We had senators, Mike Wolf, the former chair of the Omaha tribe, joined us as well. Senator Tom Brewer from Western Nebraska joined us as well, which really started to help us gain some momentum. Soon after that, we formed a task force, I'll call it, where we started to plan the initiative, as we called it. Judy rounded up a number of her friends, a number of people that we know in the preservation community, joined the effort with us. We applied to the U.S. Department of Agriculture's Rural Development Fund, and they were the first grant that we got to help do our in-depth planning on what we were going to do with the hospital. Part of that planning effort was holding 4 to 6 months of community engagement workshops. All the stakeholders in the Omaha tribe, the Walt Hill Mason communities. We probably held 4 of those workshops over the summer months. We engaged young, old, around the state, and got great feedback on what we could possibly use. Of course, we wanted to restore the hospital, but we wanted it to be a vibrant, active, sustainable use that would last long into the future. So that was what this planning initiative was all about. Out of this planning initiative, first and foremost was that this project had to respect the native customs and language of the Omaha people. That it needed to relate to health and wellness that Dr. Susan certainly established. It also needed to engage the youth of the community and help bring them the knowledge of their forebears, their fathers and mothers. And then last but not least, we needed a very strong interpretive component that would tell the story of Dr. Susan and her life. Out of that effort, we prepared a master plan. It was a nice little document with some renderings that showed how the hospital would possibly look after it's renovated. We had some floor plans that showed how the new programmatic uses would fit within the context of the historic building. Here, the lower level, you can see, find my little pointer here, a little health clinic, youth activities, a little spot for gifts and places for people to linger and buy information and things that they could take away and pass along. On the upper level, of course, this was Dr. Susan's surgical suite. This was her main office. So we're looking at engaging native arts and culture, turning her surgical suite back into interpretive and museum uses, and also having a meeting place for a wide variety of programs that can be supported in the community. And then the upper floor, potentially some live-in spaces. These were where nurses used to reside during the hospital use years. Another step that we've taken is starting to look at the site itself. It's a very long and narrow site. It's about 50 feet wide and about 300 feet long in the north-south direction. We're looking at activating the space around the hospital in a certain way that we can look at how we can interpret the landscape and restore the landscape and the view sheds to the hospital. This historic photo, it's got a couple of circles on it. Our landscape restoration specialist has identified those plant materials that Dr. Susan planted when the hospital first opened. So we're able to identify those and incorporate that into the restored landscape. We also want to potentially add healing gardens and community gardening space for the Walt Hill community, and also some outdoor education places, an outdoor amphitheater perhaps, fire pit, teepee area, and also illustrate sustainable practices that, of course, our Native communities have always embraced in their cultures with water management, and perhaps even using a geothermal system for our renovated hospital. So now I want to kind of show you what we've been able to do since 2019 when the fundraising first kicked off. We planned the restoration of the hospital in 3 different phases. The first phase was the most critical phase, which was stabilizing the deterioration from the roof leaks. That was the most critical thing. Judy Gosh-Gavash, through her connections with the Shakopee Nation, helped us gather, I think it was about a $35,000 grant, which allowed us to completely restore the roof and rebuild the eaves and start to, bring back the water shedding capabilities of that historic roof. So that was phase 1. Phase 2 kicked off in late 2019, and we completed phase 2 in the summer and fall of 2021, which was looking at the exterior envelope of the Dr. Susan Hospital. So we call that the exterior restoration. Here you can see the photos of the old asbestos cement shingles that clad the building, and underneath you can kind of see some lap siding sticking out amongst the wires that are sticking out. And here is what it looks like after we stripped away all of that material, restored the siding, restored the beautiful wood windows, restored the front porch, and the a great little screen door leading to that porch. That really nice little porch with the arched windows off of it. You can imagine patients sitting there taking in the fresh air and sunlight. So it's really a remarkable transformation. We've completely regraded the site to help with drainage away from the building. Before, water was just running into the basement from the neighboring properties. You can see we've reestablished window wells on the west side of the building to the basement, so now we can start to give light and fresh air back into the basement. This past summer, we just completed another package of work, the first part of phase 3, which brought in all new utilities to the building. So now we have new sanitary sewer, we have new water, we have new electricity, we have new gas lines for heating and cooling. And a little red box off to the end of that historic photo, you see a little stair sticking off the backside of that east porch. Well, part of that phase of work, we were able to restore and rebuild that stair off the east end of the north end of that porch. So now we have a second exit from that upper floor. So now we can safely occupy the upper levels of the hospital. As part of this phase 3, too, this still looks pretty ugly, granted, but what it does tell me is that we've stripped away all of the moldy plaster. You can see on the floor, all of the asbestos floor tiles are now gone. It's been cleaned up and it's ready for restoration. In the basement, you can see, excuse me, my voice. You can see the new fire protection system being subbed into the building. We've got handrails on the front steps for accessibility codes. So we're ready to start the interior restoration. We've also started this past summer our interpretive planning. So the final design for the interior of the restoration of the hospital, we've added the interpretive component, and both of those efforts are going hand in glove together. So we wanted to make sure that the exhibits are fully integrated into the architectural restoration of the interior. We've hired the 106 group of Minneapolis, Minnesota to help us with the interpretive planning. A very, very capable group. We solicited proposals from around the nation. We had proposals from Oregon, from New York City, from Minneapolis, from Oklahoma. People were just tremendously excited about this project, to be part of Dr. Susan's legacy. We held a number of workshops, again, with tribal members, descendants of Dr. Susan, doing an inventory. Here you see Nancy Gillis and Mary Bowen doing an inventory of some of the artifacts that we have now safely stored at the Knight Art Center. And so far, we've been able to develop some of the early goals for our interpretive planning. Certainly on exploring and telling the story of Dr. Susan's legacy and the appreciation of the Omaha culture and the people. And some of the goals for the visitor's experience as well. The Picotte board just authorized the final contract for 106 group and also the design team for the architectural group to proceed with the final design of those documents. And I'm happy to say that, I'm sorry, you probably can't read all of the dates, but we're hoping to start construction late this year or early next year, pending the reviews by the State Historical Society and the National Park Service, and getting their sign off, and then having the final restored interior with all of the exhibits in place by late next year or early 2024. Now, looking into the future, the Picotte board is not just thinking that once the hospital is done, that's the end of their work. As I mentioned earlier, the Dr. Susan's house, Lila Stabler, who lives there, is on the Picotte board, and she's working with the Picotte board for the Picotte board to eventually obtain ownership of the house and incorporate that into the, I'll call it the portfolio of the artifacts of Dr. Susan in Walt Hill. So as soon as we get the ownership of that, we're going to start a planning effort similar to what I just described that we did on the hospital. And Joe and I were talking in the lunch line today about the incredible things that are starting to occur in Walt Hill. And I don't think it's any coincidence that many of these things are happening per chance. It's certainly at the center of this is the excitement about Dr. Susan's legacy and the pride in the community. There's tremendous solar programs, trails, and skateboard parks that are being built that are going to link the community together. The incredible additions to the public school in Walt Hill to educate the youth of the community. A new small little public library, new fire protection, and to help the welfare of the community. New incubators and residential rehab programs are starting to sprout up as well. And then just down the road over at Macy, the opening just in the past week or so of the new Career Academy for the Omaha Nation, which contains programs for early childhood education, for culinary arts, for STEM programs, and Dr. Susan would love this for medicine and for early medical training. So members of this community can now go on after graduating from this academy to medical careers and further education. And if some of you haven't walked down our Centennial Mall here, last October, the statue of Dr. Susan was placed right across from the state office building. Ben Victor, who also did the Chief Standing Bear statue that's now in Statuary Hall in Congress, did this statue in honor of Dr. Susan. I love this photograph where she's standing there. Her gaze is both on the state office building and one eye is down toward the state capitol. And now children that visit the Centennial Mall and parade down to the capitol each year can see her and take pride in that. No project is done in a vacuum, and there are hundreds of people to thank for the effort on this, not least of which is the board of directors of the Picotte Center that allowed us to come alongside and to help them reinvigorate and restore the Dr. Susan Hospital. The advisory council, which was whipped together by the efforts of Judy Goshkabach and the many subcommittees that the board has established. We've received, within the last couple of months, I think we've tallied up approximately $3.5 million of donations for the renovation of the Dr. Susan Hospital, which will cover the landscape work as well as the interior work and the exhibits. And a few of those donors, generous donors, are displayed here. And finally, the project team as well. So I know it's time to get back to your sessions. I want to thank you for your attention.
Maybe take a question or two?
Sure, I'd be happy to. get their stuff.
Anyone have a question? Please.
Yes.
Well, we're from Colorado, so where is Bald Hill?
Bald Hill is straight south of Sioux City. It's about halfway between Sioux City and Omaha on Highway 77. So it's in northeast Nebraska. Right.
Anybody else?
It's a short drive from Lincoln.
Really good.
Yeah.
Amazing. Amazing.
Thank you.
Thank you.